It's the best of both worlds today. If you're tired of us being in the book of Job, we are going to be in the book of James today. The other side of that is if you want to hear more about Job, we're going to be talking about Job today. So any way you slice it, it's the best of both worlds. The only time in the New Testament that Job is mentioned is in James chapter 5. And I thought as a capstone to this series of working through the book of Job, we would look at that little passage where Job is very quickly mentioned. Now that we have an overview, I would like to think, if you've been here for the last 11 weeks or so, a bit of an overview of the entire book. You might have more of an appreciation of why it is that James uses Job as an illustration and just exactly how that fits into the overall scheme. Job, the book of Job, is really about dealing with the problem of evil, and this continues to be a problem for us. We're always looking for answers. I came across this Peanuts cartoon this week. 9 home runs in a row. Good grief. Charlie Brown says, we're getting slaughtered again, Schroeder. I don't know what to do. Why do we have to suffer like this? Schroeder says, man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. What? He's quoting from the book of Job, Charlie Brown, 7th verse, 5th chapter. Actually, the problem of suffering is a very profound one. Lucy interrupts. If a person has bad luck, it's because he's done something wrong. That's what I always say. That's what Job's friends told him. But I doubt if, Lucy interrupts, what about Job's wife? I don't think she gets enough credit. And then everybody chimes in. I think a person who never suffers, never matures. Suffering is actually very important. Who wants to suffer? Don't be ridiculous. Pain is a part of life. And Linus responds, a person who speaks only of the patience of Job reveals that he knows very little of the book. Now, the way I see it, Charlie Brown laments, I don't have a ball team, I have a theological seminary. Exactly. The problem of pain is one that will continually be discussed. But if you read through the book of Job, and hopefully you've got Job's theodicy that he wanted us to see, that the answers are found in the character of God. We have to submit to God's sovereignty. We have to acknowledge that he is independent, he is free, and he works all things according to his will and according to his plan, and all for his glory. But in the book of James, you might know that James mentions Job with the little phrase that Job is patient. This is the famous phrase of Job's character that is known. In the King James Version, it uses that phrase. And for whatever reason, that has really captured our attention and has latched onto our psyche. When we talk about Job, we even use that little phrase. He has the patience of Job. Truthfully, that is actually not a good translation of that word. And in fact, the New King James and every other, if I'm not mistaken, English translation does not use the word patience there. I'm not sure why it is that we latch onto this notion that Job was patient. Here's a little cartoon I found. Before we begin, assure me that you're not contagious, Doc. Caption, the patient of Job. It's not even funny. We latch on to this notion that Job was somehow patient and that this is the lesson that James wants us to see from Job's life. Job chapter 3. Does this sound like a patient man? Verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth and said, let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. I don't even want to live anymore. I want to die right now. That's what he killed all the way through chapter 3. Does that sound like a patient man? The end of chapter 3, verse 26. I am not at ease, nor am I quiet. I have no rest, but trouble comes. Does this sound like patience? Job is anything but patient. Chapter 6, verse 11, book of Job. What is my strength that I should wait? What is my end that I should be patient? He thought he believed he was going to die, and he was wondering, why is it taking so long? Let me just die. Job is not patient. Not that you need to be beat over the head with this. Job 13, verses 3 to 5. But I would speak to the Almighty. Job wants to plead his case with God, and he wants to do it now. I desire to argue my case with God. As for you, he's talking to his friends, you whitewash with lies, worthless physicians are you all. Oh, that you would keep silent, and it would be your wisdom This is not a patient man. I've been listening to you, and you would be smarter if you would just shut up, to say very plainly. That's Job's sentiment. This is not patience. Why do we call Job patient? Not again that you need to see this incessantly. Job chapter 23, verses 2 to 4. Does this sound like a patient person? Today also my complaint is bitter. My hand is heavy on account of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where to find him. Oh, that I might come even to his seat. He's talking about pleading his case before God. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I want that now. I want justice. Job is not patient. In fact, the better translation of that little text, not that you need to know this, is really an English word, steadfast. It's close to patience, but it's not the same. Steadfast, as we'll talk about, is more of a tenaciousness, of a willingness to tolerate and to push on and push through. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Let's read the text in James. We want to put a capstone to the book of Job. So we're looking at the only reference in the New Testament to Job. And James, if you don't know anything about the book of James, is about some of the themes of Job. It's about suffering. These famous verses at the beginning of the book of James. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces, and this is the same word that he uses in James 5 for Job. The testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If you want to understand the concept of what James is trying to pull out as we try to learn a lesson from the overarching book of Job, if you want to pull out something practical from Job's life that James is borrowing from, it's that phrase, that word, steadfastness, in the midst of trials. And James, as you're about to see, uses Job in a very quick way to illustrate the theme of this book, because this is a constant theme. I don't know if you've experienced it. Probably have. We don't always have cheery days. We don't always have sunshiny days. Sometimes there's a day you just feel a little bit like Eeyore. Sometimes there's a day things just don't go right. Sometimes there are real, serious tragedies. We do not live in a perfect world. And I know it's no surprise to you to be told that those kind of trials just seem to come all the time. And if it's not this thing, it's that thing, it's another thing. What's going on? This is exactly what Jesus told his disciples we would live like, especially as God's people. I've said these things to you, Jesus speaking to his disciples, John 16, verse 33, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. I know you can go to Christian bookstores and you can buy a book of the promises of God. Have you ever seen those books? Have you ever noticed that there are always these upbeat promises? I'll tell you what, you will never find this promise in a promise book, but this is a promise. In the world, you will have tribulation. He wanted his disciples to know, if you're going to follow me, it is not going to be easy. You are going to be kicking against the goads. You are going to be going uphill. You are going to be going swimming against the stream. Your entire life, you are going to look odd. You are going to sound strange. People will not understand you. They will mock you. They will curse you. They will persecute you. If you're going to follow me, it's a promise. You're going to have tribulation. So James picks up this theme. He knows that it's a constant recurring theme throughout the New Testament and for all of God's people to know. Not only by following Christ, but their everyday experiences bring tribulation. Let's look at this text for a few minutes. Be patient. This is the paragraph where Job is mentioned. James 5, verse 7. That little word patient is exactly what you think it means. It means patient. The Greek word, macrothumeo, not that you need to get all this technical stuff. It's a compound word. That means it's made from two smaller words. The first part is the word macro. In our English, we use the word macro when we talk about sometimes, I know it in terms of photography. You would have a macro lens that you would put on your camera. And the macro lens, what does it do? It makes things bigger. So if you want to take a picture of a bumblebee or a ladybug or whatever the case, and it puts it in the whole screen. It takes the small thing and makes it big. Well, the original idea of macros was it's big in a long way. And thumos is the word temper. It's a compound word. It's to be long, tempered. That's all that it means. And sometimes it's translated in King James as long-suffering. That's the concept of the word. To just hang in there. Be patient. To endure describes the attitude which can endure delay and bear suffering and never give in. In talking about Job, as he's about to get to that little illustration, James uses this word to be patient. He lays the groundwork. This is the context in which Job is borrowed in. You want to know what it looks like to have Job as an overall example? Be long-suffering. Lock in for the long, hard row, knowing that tribulation is normal. Be patient. How long do we have to hang in? Oh, thank you, James, for the encouragement. Until the coming of the Lord. Yes. How long is that going to be? We do not know. Isn't that part of the charm of walking with Christ? We do not know the agenda, his agenda for us and what the end game is. We know it in a broad brush picture, but this is how long the call to tribulation and suffering through tribulation is. Until the Lord returns. That is, I must say, could be a very long time. We'll talk about that as we unfold this passage. So James now uses 3 illustrations to express what it looks like to be long-suffering, to tolerate persecution, to stand up under all of our trials, to hang on. He uses 3 illustrations. Farmer, the prophets, surprisingly enough, our New Testament reference to Job. You want to know how to live? You're going to have to tolerate persecutions. You're going to have to stand up under all measures of difficulties. And this is the call to our lives. Therefore, be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer, this is an illustration. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it, till he receives the early and late rains. This doesn't exactly translate to our 21st century farming, because in these days, these people farmed for their own sustenance. We farm oftentimes for a business. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not suggesting there's an issue here, but for the most part, these people farmed because this is how they lived. And if the crops didn't grow, they didn't eat. So this was not just a little thing they did, to make some money for a new car. This was their survival. And so they utterly depended on the rains to bring them their crop and to bring them their food at harvest time. This is the illustration that he borrows. And I grew up as a city boy. And even I know that you don't put the seed in the ground and then tomorrow morning expect to find a watermelon sitting there. Even I know that. And I'm a dingbat when it comes to plants. It's the truth. But this is exactly what he's saying. And then he borrows this phrase of early and late rain. What does that mean to you? The early rain to them came late October, early November. This was the sign. Now it's time to plant. The earth that had been baked by the hot sun through the summer months would now be softened. They would now have an opportunity to get out there. They knew once the first rain came, the seeds would begin to germinate. There are winter rains to the Middle East, but they're very light. They're insignificant. And if they do or do not come, it doesn't change the fact of whether the crop is going to fail. When the farmer puts a seed in the ground, this is James' illustration, he really is doing this in a long-term vision. He has no idea for certain if this is going to work. The only way he knows this works is when the late rain comes. The late rains will come in the Near East and the Middle East in April and May, and that guarantees the crops will grow. James' point is this: the farmer has the long view in mind. Is farming fun? Is it laborious? Are you pulling weeds? Are you in the hot sun? Are you tending to the crops? Are you chasing away vermin? Are you dealing with this farm? Are you just lying in your bed eating bonbons while you're hoping that things show up? No, you labor for the long term. That's the illustration. Be patient. Trials are normal. Tribulations are a part of what it is to follow me. Your life will not be easy, but I promise you this, it will end when the Lord comes. Be patient. You also be patient. Establish your hearts. Interesting verb this. Establish your heart. It means to strengthen, to stabilize, to batten down. Batten down the hatches. Here's the idea. Get in your head right now that these trials are going to continue to come your whole entire life, and you will not see justice for them. You will not see an end to them until the Lord returns. Establish your hearts. Too many times, with all due respect, and I'm not talking about anybody in this room, I find myself with a family who has completely come apart at the seams because something has happened, a medical situation or tragedy or whatever the case, and they have become undone as if they cannot believe that something tragic could happen to me. Establish your hearts, people. Batten down the hatches and get ready, because it's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know when. I don't know who it's going to happen to, but I'm just telling you, we live in a fallen world, and James warns us that this is the trajectory of all of our lives. Sounds like encouraging words, I know, but it is something we need to come to grips with, and that's his phrase. Bolster your position and recognize you're in this for the long haul. And if you want justice for that person who has treated you unjustly, and you've suffered at the hand of somebody who really needs to be given whatever should be coming to them, and you can do nothing about it, bolster your position. Establish your hearts in this. There's a day coming when every wrong will be made right, when every injustice is going to be made right, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. The picture here is that his hand is on the doorknob. To us, it feels like we've got all the time in the world. But in God's great perspective, it is ready to happen now. He has nothing else on his agenda. This is his next event in the history of his story that we are in the middle of living through. That he is unraveling in the midst of all of our pain. That he is creating in the midst from his own heart and his own mind, using all of the wickedness and evil in this world to accomplish his own purposes. And there is a moment coming when he is going to decide that's it. We are not tolerating this anymore, and we are called to wait for the justice of God to fall at the return of Christ. I don't know how many times you hear messages about the return of Christ. They're quite infrequent, quite honestly, by and large. And this seems like a strange thing sometimes we even talk about, but this is the Christian faith. This is what Jesus taught. John 14, verses 1-3, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? Are these not famous words to you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, that where you may be, where I am, you may be also. This was the first time the disciples learned that Jesus was going to go somewhere and come back again. He's what? We've been talking about this ever since. From Acts 1, while they were gazing into heaven, he went, behold, two men standing by them in white robes, the disciples looking into the sky. He said, men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus, who was taken up from you into heaven, will come in the same way you saw him go into heaven. And we have been waiting for this moment ever since. From then until now. This is our vindication. This is our ultimate rectification of every wrong that's ever happened to us. This is the ultimate end game that makes all the wrongs right. And we are called by the book of James to stand firm in the midst of all of our trials and hang on. We're waiting for the day when all things will be made right. Be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. He's standing at the door. The judge, this is the picture of, we think, from the law of the day, first century, double doors that the judge would come bursting through, and you would be waiting in court for your case to be heard, and you didn't know if the judge was in the back room, what was he doing, and you're waiting. And any minute now, the judge is going to burst into the doors, and he's going to hear your case. Any minute now, your problems are going to be made right. Any minute now, things are going to change. Any minute now, the tables are going to turn. And all those people who say that we're crazy for standing up for the things we stand up for the morality we seek, for the laws we want changed, for all that we preach against whatever society is doing, and all the craziness of the Christian faith, and all those wacky people, one day, the tables will turn. And all the wrongs will be made right. He is standing at the door. Just to belabor this point and beat you over the head with it, so we don't talk about this much. I basically plagiarized an outline from Alistair Begg. If you don't know Alistair Begg, he's a preacher in Cleveland, well-known radio speaker and author, whatever. I lifted this from him. I just thought that was cool. I'll just give you, this is an overview. What is the return of Christ going to look like? What is the day we're waiting for? First of all, you need to know, we do not know the day. It's secret to us. It's not to the mind of God, but that day we will not know, and we do not know. I can remember in 1988, there was a book that came out. It was called 88 Reasons That Jesus Will Return in 1988. Do you remember that book? Guess what? You don't even know about it anymore. Why? How many times do we hear people telling us we've got a date and we know what it is and we know what's going to happen? By the way, the author immediately came out with a book the next year, 89 Reasons He Will Return in 89. I'm not making that up. We do not know the day. Anybody who tells you they do is wrong. We do know this. It's going to be business as usual. It's going to be weddings on that day, funerals on that day, babies born on that day, people going into surgery on that day, people having their retirement party on that day, people going on their vacation on that day, people making plans on that day, people at the bank buying a house and getting a mortgage on that day, people living their lives on that day. It's the last thing on anybody's agenda. It will come like a thief in the night. We know that it will not be in secret, in the sense that the whole world will know it. Every eye will see him. It will be spectacular, to use the word. And it will be a time of judgment, time of separating the sheep and the goats, and every wrong will be made right. And that is our day that we cling to as God's people. That is our day that we are waiting for, when God will once and for all wipe every tear from our eyes and deal with sickness and trials and tragedies. That is our day. As an example of patience, take the prophets. Illustration 2, not that I'm going to belabor this, you'll be happy to know, who spoke in the name of the Lord. Think about the prophets, how much they suffered. Moses with the children of Israel, never happy, always whining, hungry, tired, thirsty, whatever the case. Moses trying to deal with all these people and constantly being battered around. David, who was chased like a partridge through the wilderness, trying to live his life and trying to be, without being hunted down and killed, never ever at peace. Through this time with Saul. Jeremiah, if you know the story, Jeremiah is so persecuted by God's people as he comes with the message. He gets thrown into a dry cistern. There's mud in the cistern. He sinks so deep. Someone comes trying to rescue him, throws down a rope, and now they're afraid they're going to pull his arms off because he's so deep down into the mud that he can't even get out of the mud. How do you like to be God's servant and know that your future is just about persecution? Do you remember Daniel? Where did he get tossed? You remember this story, boys and girls? Number 3 in Sunday school, Daniel goes into the lion's den. How about Hosea? His life was miserable. God gave him a marriage that was unlike any miserable life you would ever want to live. This was nothing but misery for these men. Every single one of them, right to the New Testament. The last Old Testament prophet, you would say, is in our New Testament. John the Baptist, prior to the appearing of the Holy Spirit, so he's kind of Old Testament. And he literally lost his head at a birthday party. I mean, nothing about these people were happy lives. So what makes us think if they were serving God and they had misery and trials, What makes us think that we would live any differently in the midst of our seeking to follow Christ? Jesus himself decried out in Matthew 23, verse 37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets, stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children as a hen gathers her brood under her wings? And you would not. You kill the prophets. Stephen, when he's being stoned in Acts 7, he goes through a litany of all the prophets that you killed. And his point is there one that you have not killed? And then you ultimately killed Jesus. All the prophets knew was suffering and trials. And what did they do? They died believing in faith that there would come a day, like the farmer who puts a seed in the ground by faith, there is coming a day. Behold, illustration 3. We consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You've heard of the steadfastness of Job. I know some of you are like, finally, we're here. Steadfastness, this is also a compound word. Hupomeno, we've talked about this word in various places because it's a very common New Testament word and an important one. 2 words pushed together to make one. We do the same thing in English, and no other, this language is no different than ours, making compound words. It just simply means, hupo is under, meno means to remain. It literally means, I don't need to tell you, to remain under, to stay under fire, to stick it out. In English, we might even say there's a stick-to-itiveness. Is that even a word? A hanging in there kind of attitude. That's the idea that Job, he's declaring that Job hung in there. He was impatient, but what does he mean he hung in? He waited for God to appear and vindicate him. He waited for his answers from God. He waited. This means to endure, to sustain a load of miseries, adversaries, persecutions, and provocations. Job, you've heard of the steadfastness of Job. You've seen the purpose of the Lord. Ultimately, what happened with Job? He recognized that God had a reason for his suffering. That God revealed to him what was going on in the midst of his suffering that he didn't understand. But it didn't come until the end. Now the Lord is compassionate and merciful. This little illustration of Job is a very simple one in the book of James. But if you look at the whole overarching picture of the book of Job as we've walked through it, Job is really a picture for us of sticking it out, of hanging in, of not giving in. We will have trials, we will have tribulations. It's a promise. But we are like Job. We live in a world of suffering, difficulty, and challenge until our dying day. Job suffered at length. Establish your hearts. Batten down the hatches. I'm not saying every day is going to be misery, but I'm saying that we know that misery is not unusual when we walk with God. He allows it in our lives for his purposes and for his reasons. And just like Job, he went through suffering. And get ready. I don't know what's on your agenda, on God's agenda for you. But get ready. There's going to be something. He's going to trim you down. He's going to sharpen you and make you more into the image of Christ. He's going to allow things into your life for his purposes, for his glory. It's going to happen. And we, like Job, will know suffering. And we, like Job, may also have people that gather around us, remind us that there are no real answers in this world, that we'll always somehow feel it, there's some mystery to it. Friends remind us of those who have no real answers, whose comfort falls short of helping us understand the reasons for suffering. Job's friends, they are a picture to us of this world that has no answers, that can not explain any suffering, that gives us no satisfying reasons, that always leaves us hungering for more, and the only answer is found in the fact that God has his purposes, and that one day, he will make all things right. And we cling to the promise that, like the farmer who's got the long-term view, That like the prophets who lived lives of suffering and died by faith, believing they would be vindicated. That like Job, who never in his life fully understood, but saw a picture of the reasoning and experienced the blessing of God. So one day we will too experience that exact blessing. We wait with a steadfast spirit for the one who will vindicate us, remove our pain, and right all wrongs that are done against us. We cling to the same picture that Job had, the same hope of Job. If only God would come. And exactly that. That is our answer for ultimate suffering. We go through this valley because God is in charge. He is sovereign. And He has a plan for His glory and for His purposes in your life. Because this is our God.